Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, stay with us. You don't want to miss this. My special interview with the Pennsylvania Budget Secretary, Charles Zogby. We're going to talk about all things financial. And then Capitol Wire's Pete DeCourcy will find out what the big story of the week is. Where in Harrisburg, maybe? We'll be back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, let's put it this way. The governor has introduced the budget, has a little more spending in it than last year, about 2.4% increase. The guy who knows all about budgets, Charles Zogby, he's in charge of... He's the budget guru. I called you that once before on this program, I think. Welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you again, Terry.
All right, we're going to, before we get to the Pennsylvania budget, you've got to explain something to me. The sequester, as we tape this, is scheduled to happen. Now, about 2.4% cut in the overall spending for this next fiscal year. Now, listen to this. In Pennsylvania, they're talking about $26.4 million in decrease in spending, primary and secondary ed, 360 teachers and teacher-age jobs gone. Military, they're talking about thousands of jobs being closed at the Department of Defense. They're talking about public health. I can go through this list. How does a 2.4% cut in the budget result in all of this massive cuts to Pennsylvania's aid from the federal government?
Well, and it's also cuts after massive explosions of federal spending over the last many years. And the cuts are real, Terry. I mean, we ought to recognize that there will be, whether it's in education with Title I, special education, there will be potentially less money coming from Pennsylvania, depending on how the president and the executive branch decides to enact these cuts. They do have some flexibility. And so it will be felt, whether it's a loss of teachers. Yeah. Well, the cuts are real. The cuts I don't think are massive when you're talking about $85 billion in huge federal spending. But how they exactly play out at a local level, that a district might receive less in Title I funds or less in special education funds won't necessarily directly lead to a teacher layoff. Those are going to be decisions that local school boards, local administrators are going to have to make. And my sense is that they're going to try to have those cuts impact with as least impact or harm to students as possible.
I mean, you deal with budgets, department, line items. It's sort of mindless way to do it, isn't it?
It is absolutely mindless, and I don't think many people disagree that the federal government needs to rein in spending. We can't have budgets where we're spending $1 trillion more every year. But a couple of things. One is that it is mindless and that it's across the board. You know, Governor Corbett has made some very tough decisions over the last couple of years, but he's made choices and set priorities. We've had a failure of that in Washington. And I think the other piece here is that it's really the explosion of entitlement spending. That is the real problem that confronts our federal government, not discretionary spending. And there just seems to be an unwillingness in Washington, particularly out of the White House, to deal with serious entitlement reform.
All right, let's talk about another big issue before the Commonwealth, which is Medicaid spending. You know, since the Supreme Court decision dealing with the Affordable Care Act, governors and legislatures have the opportunity to go ahead and increase the coverage for potential Medicaid recipients, maybe about 850,000 people in our state.
Yes.
All around us, everybody has done that, including Republican governors in Ohio and New Jersey. Governor Corbett has not yet made a final decision. You're going to help me out here. In his budget address, I noticed that he didn't close the door completely. You all have questions you want answered from the federal government. Where do you all stand on Medicaid expansion?
Well, the governor's taking a serious look at Medicaid and Medicaid expansion and whether it's something that Pennsylvania can afford, not just today, but over the years. I mean, this governor in particular has been left with a lot of what I call legacy issues because of the failure of past administrations, say, to address transportation or pensions. We now find ourselves confronting crises in those areas.
But we're going to run to a break, but here's my question to you. Have you made a final decision on that?
The governor's not made a final decision. We're looking at how much it can cost and whether we can customize this to Pennsylvania's need and do it Pennsylvania's way, not Washington's way.
So the people are wrong when they say that he's a done deal, not going to expand it, it's out of the question.
Governor has never said declaratively no on this.
We're going to run to a break. Sorry to interrupt. When we come back, I'm going to talk to the Budget Secretary about another big issue, liquor privatization. It's a huge issue. It's before the General Assembly. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Charles Zogby. He's the Budget Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're going through a laundry list of important issues that are before the legislature. The governor made recommendations about some of these at the budget message he delivered in February. All right, liquor control privatization. Third governor to try it, Governor Thornburg and Ridge. You guys are back at it again. I'm telling you, as I listen to what's going on in the legislature, doesn't seem to be a huge interest in this, even though the voters I've polled on it seem to have some interest and support for it. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, the voters obviously want change and they want more convenience. We have an antiquated system. We have a system where really every one of our stores, if you take out the wholesale functions, is a profit-losing enterprise. We're also in a constrained budget era, and the governor believes that by privatizing the system, both wholesale and retail functions, we could put an extra $1 billion into public education in a time when our schools and our teachers, our school districts need it. And so the governor thinks this is a good trade-off. I think there is support in the General Assembly, but again, this is something that we're going to have to work through in the next several months to achieve.
Let me put it another way. There's some folks who say, well, what about a little hybrid here? You keep the same Liquor Control Board operation, but you allow them to perform the same functions, let them expand the licenses. You want to expand them by, I think, 600, go to 1,200 retail licenses. Let them do that and manage it and sort of create a hybrid. Now, I noticed, and I've listened to the governor on number of occasions, full privatization. He doesn't talk. Maybe that's a political, a posturing to accept the. Are you open to a compromise on this?
Well, I'll leave that to the governor to speak to. I think the issue, though, Terry, is that the governor's looking to maximize revenues for public education. So there are many thoughts and ideas short of full privatization that folks have. The problem is that it doesn't yield the kind of revenues that we can make serious investments in our public schools, and that's what the governor's committed to try to do. And so I think he's definitely going to be pushing this through several months, and we'll see where we end up. But he believes that this is a way that we can, and again, in a constrained era, take $1 billion and invest it in our kids, invest it in our public schools. And that core function of state government is public education. It's not selling and marketing alcohol to people.
All right, I'm going to run to a break. When we come back, there's a couple of other subjects. Transportation funding, it's a huge issue. There's a consensus. It's rare to get a consensus in a Pennsylvania legislature. There's a consensus. Republicans and Democrats both agree that something has to be done about the funding on a very important issue that we've talked about many times on this program. We'll be back with the Budget Secretary after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Charles Zogby, the Budget Secretary for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're talking about all things budget. I want to chat now with the Budget Secretary about transportation. We've done a myriad of programs on this. Governor's own commission, $2.5 billion a year is needed to fix roads and bridges, and some consideration for mass transit. Over in the legislature, you introduced a bill, or the governor came out and said, we'll raise the oil franchise tax. We talked about that. Republicans in the legislature have said, we need a little more. Some have said maybe we'll raise license and registration fees. Some want to get to the $2.5 billion a year. What's your position of the administration on, you're going to get something on whether you can buy into increases or not?
Well, I think, the governor has put out a proposal, and he's mindful that oftentimes it's a starting point for the discussion. I think some of the factors, though, is that before the governor's proposal, we didn't have the commission report, the TFAC report, we didn't have the public-private partnership bill that's now law, where we can bring in private companies to maybe do bridge repair or bridge rehab. So we've got a number of other tools, modernization from PennDOT, a number of other tools that are in the box. The governor thinks that his proposal is sized correctly. There's others that don't agree with that. I think, we'll be in search of the Goldilocks proposal that's just right over the coming months.
Republican, Democratic support, and
it has to have House and Senate support as well. There's two chambers that may have a different view on this. So I think we'll work towar's a compromise.
Governor has to be willing to put his John Hancock on the bottom line, right?
That's exactly.
Well, let's talk about another aspect of that and it's been tried over the years. The feds have said no, and that's about user fees when you toll. If you use it, you should pay somewhat proportionate. So if you're out in the roads, any consideration of doing some more tolling?
Well, I think the tolling aspect from a federal level, the feds, as I've understood from Secretary Shoke, have basically put up a stop sign that we can't toll in many areas. But I think the public-private partnership, for instance, there you might have a bridge where you're able to put tolls on a bridge that's used and generate enough revenue to not only do a major rehab or construction on that portion, but surrounding areas as well. So I think there is potentially a tolling element here. And I think from the governor's perspective, we're talking about putting these on the people that are actually using the infrastructure. So it's not the person like the licensing fee who maybe isn't riding the roads, but again, trying to make it more of a user-based fee system as it is in large part today.
I think the bigger point you made, and then I'll let you go, the bigger point is that it's a starting point and that you've not ruled out working with the legislature on additional ways to raise revenue.
We do that on all of our initiatives, Terry. As you know, it's a process of give and take, and I fully expect over the course of the spring that we're going to have those sorts of discussions with the General Assembly.
The producer's in my ear. He says we got another minute or so. Pensions. 41, I can't figure out whether it's 41 or $44 billion.
$41 billion, unfunded liability.
44 billion as unfunded liability, but 41 is what I've been using as well. You want to go to a 401k for new employees. Again, in the legislature, there seems to be some reluctance to go very far with that. Give us your position.
Well, the problem is, Terry, is that our pension payments are rising rapidly. The year-over-year payments are over $500 million. They're taking 60% plus of all new revenue into the Commonwealth, and they're really squeezing the general fund. Funding for education, human services is under pressure because we've got these enormous pension payments that we have to make. And we're not talking about putting less into our pension systems. We're going to put in more this year, but we're talking about a little less and paying for that through reforms for future employees as well as current employees. And the idea is that we're going to preserve all of the benefits of current retirees, all of the benefits that current employees have earned to date, but we're talking about a slightly different deal going forward with the impact largely in the out years on those who would have the most state or public school district service. And it's a way to rebalance our obligations between our pension costs and our general fund. We can't cut core services and programs to people to basically pay for public employee pensions. And that's what's happening right now. All the taxpayers are going to be forced to contribute more so that public school employees and state workers get a better retirement deal than they have right now in the private sector.
All right, well, look, I want to thank you. Maybe I know June won't be a great time to get you on this program, but we're going to try because that's probably when they're going to be in the midst of having the debate over all of these things. All right, Pete DeCourcy is next. We're going to find out what the big story of the week is in the state capitol following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, sitting across from me is not Pete DeCourcy, as you will see in a moment. We're going to keep the budget secretary on. There are 3 or 4 other important issues I want to talk about with him. Pete will be on another show. Mr. Secretary, thanks for staying on.
Happy to.
All right, I want to continue. I wasn't finished with this pension inquiry stuff. I mean, there's lots of debate about how to do it. The critics say that you go to a 401k, it really doesn't solve anything. It just pushes the debt down the road. What's your response to that? As you know, you've read that criticism in a bunch of papers.
Well,
go ahead.
I think there's a couple things. One is that the overwhelming retirement package of choice in the private sector is a 401k. So I think we have to confront the fact that we right now have state and school district employees that have a better retirement deal than the taxpayers who have to support them. That's one thing. I think the biggest thing with a 401k, though, is that it takes the liability off of the Commonwealth and the taxpayers. You started the question with a $41 billion liability in the last segment. That has grown because we've had past governors, General Assembly provide benefits that weren't paid for, or simply underfund the pension systems because they had the ability to do that. You take that away with a 401k. So what we're talking about here is really not something that this governor will immediately enjoy, but future generations of taxpayers won't be saddled with the prospect of billions of dollars in debt because games were played with our pension system. And I think that's a huge thing to remove from taxpayers. That future liability for future pension benefits, I think, is a huge part of the relief.
Yeah, does it work fiscally if you have fewer employees that are in the system that you're still going to have to pay full benefits for, but you're not getting the contribution from the employee as well as the employer to cover? I mean, I always thought the assumption was that you got to keep adding employees, and have, go ahead.
Well, and what we'll do is so as the state or school districts as an employer, will make a payment to pay for the benefits, the normal cost, as they say, of active employees. They'll pay, and the state will pay a cost for the defined contribution, the 401k plan. And then over that total salary base, we'll make contributions based on the unfunded liability. So we're going to pay our debt down over time, just as taxpayers' families do with a mortgage. You don't pay a mortgage all at once, or at least most people don't. They pay it over 30 years, and that's what we'll do with our unfunded liability.
How much credibility do you give to the criticism that in past administrations, and this would apply, I think, to both Democratic and Republican administrations, there was no employer contribution rate into the system for, I think, 4 years, you'll correct me, for 4 years or so, in addition to the market crash, which obviously led to less investment, revenues coming from the investment side. Which of those two are they both responsible, do you think, for this $41 billion deficit?
Well, they each play a role. I think the market returns plays the largest role because 70% of our earnings are based on market returns. And when you have, as we did with the Great Recession and a big downturn in the market, that affects revenues or the growth of the investments. But it's also the case, too. Governor Rendell, for instance, underfunded pensions by nearly $6 billion starting in 2004. And then that money was spent elsewhere. And so to shortchange the pension funds by that amount, that clearly played a role in the $41 billion unfunded liability today. And you also had other governors that gave, for instance, COLAs, cost of living increases, that were unpaid for. The last one was done in, I think, 2002, right. $1.5 billion that had no funding source. So all of these things together contributed to the problem. The 401k stops that from ever occurring again. And then what the governor has said is that we've got to look at the future benefits of current employees and just trimming somewhat the growth in those benefits, guaranteeing everybody what they've already earned, but a little less going forward, not only to avoid deep cuts in the general fund and core services and programs that the rest of Pennsylvania enjoys, but also to ensure that we can pay the current benefits, because the track that we're on now is unsustainable.
All right, just for the record, we did have Michael Crossie from PSEA on. The Pennsylvania State Education Association. We get we strive to get a variety of points of view on this program. I want to let's spend a minute on the overall budget process. The hearings are underway. Do you expect the legislature? I mean, some tweaks here and there. I don't get any sense that we're looking at a major deviation from what the governor recommended. Is that your sense as you've been following these hearings?
I think so, and I think if you look back, Terry, Democrat or Republican governors do a pretty good job of getting most of what they want in their budgets. And I think I've not seen at least a lot of criticism about the plan that this governor has put forward, the core budget proposal. But beyond that, the governor wants to achieve, we've talked about liquor store privatization, the wholesale retail functions. He wants to put another $1 billion into public education. We need pension reform to balance this budget. We've got $175 million in savings. That's going to have to be made up with cuts elsewhere if we don't get pension reform. And we need to make progress on modernizing our transportation infrastructure. So all of those big three are the core governor's goals, in addition to a balanced budget on time.
We have about a minute 10. One of the things that I've read recently has to do with these escalating prison costs, which I think you're trying to get a handle on, and the number of folks in prisons. You're closed 2 prisons, or you're closing 2 prisons. What's the general position of the Corbett administration on these prison costs and how you're trying to bring them into line?
Well, we have tried. I mean, last year we held the Department of Corrections budget level funded for the first time in over a decade. We had about a $60 million increase this year, in large part of bringing a new prison online. But we've seen the first the governor's Justice Reinvestment Initiative, where we're talking about being smart on crime and how we deal with public safety. That's projected to save over $130 million over the next many years that we're going to, in part, reinvest. We just right-sized our youth development centers and the Department of Public Welfare. That's going to be saving nearly $13 million, 10 of which we're going to reinvest in the juvenile programs.
You get the last word on this. Again, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Terry.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.